Hello, this is Vince again. This posting is going to cover an operation that surrounds converging runway operations. And at Detroit it was called the Southwest Flow. This all began in 2003 by someone named Ken Durham. He pushed this forward. It got a controller suspended for questioning the safety of the operation. In comparison to the conduct you're going to see by managers at Detroit that did far worse than that with zero, and I'm talking zero ramifications. This is where it all began, our fight to correct these problems about safety at Detroit. And the good thing about this, when it was all over, the FAA agreed with us. And they actually changed the rules for converging runway operations. So let's move forward. It's going to be document heavy, so let's dive in. I'm going to use this chart to discuss the converging runway operations at Detroit, the Southwest Flow. Runway 21 left, this runway here was closed, so they landed the radar room. Runway 27 left and runway 22 right. Tower departed, runway 22 left, the red, runway 21 right, the red. The problem comes up is when the arrival on runway 27 left aborts the landing, executes a missed approach, goes around. And there's a departure on runway 21 right and or a departure on runway 22 left. They conflicted in airspace approximately here where these arrows and these lines meet. So it was unsafe for the flying public. We went to management, and this began in 2003 under Ken Durham, and said we need more spacing between arrivals on this runway to avoid these confliction points so we could depart between them safely. They said, you're not getting it. I said, what about wake turbulence generating aircraft off runway 22 left? A heavy Boeing 747 would depart here. If they aborted their landing, they would get knotted up in the wake turbulence. Too bad you're not getting it. A controller questioned this in 2003. They got suspended. They readdressed it in 2007, started running the operation again. The same questions came up. We were told, no, be quiet, you're not getting anything. And what you're going to see now are the documents and emails that led up to a Department of Transportation OIG investigation, special counsel investigation, and an inquiry from Congress. So let's move forward. So this is an email, and it was one of the inciting emails that propelled us forward to say, look, they really do not care about safety. Now, this was put out by Mr. Grammis, Kevin Grammis. He was the operations manager for the tower, and he put this out. You can see on May 31st, 2007. This was given to me by a very decent supervisor that was under his watch during all this. And some of the things that came up that were quite disturbing on here is departing runway 21 right and arriving runway 27 left, that chart I just showed you. He states it allows application of visual separation between arrival and departure with less than 3 miles until course is diverged. That's ridiculous. Because we could see both airplanes, but if the one went around, they were in immediate confliction as soon as the airplane pulled up. And then he goes on to state, separate from the runway separation issue of hitting the gap I discussed last week. We tried to explain to him, you have to have a bigger gap to make it safe, and they ignored us. So that was red flag number one. And then you're going to see some of the verbiage in this email is very difficult the way they wrote it. The second one is arriving runway 21 right and runway 27 left. Well, that's something that they rarely did. They rarely vectored to that in the radar room because there was no type of approach to runway 21 right, only visual. They could only see it and land on it. So he's talking about landing on that one arrival runway I showed you, runway 21 right, and arriving runway 27 left. He states, allows application of visual separation between simultaneous arrivals, runway 21 right, 27 left, before loss of radar separation. And application of visual in the event of a missed until radar separation is achieved. Again, it goes back to the exact same thing. As soon as those airplanes pull up to go around, they're in immediate confliction unless we have large enough gaps for us to be able to pull them apart safely. They ignored it. Then he goes on to try to justify, I based my response this morning on, this is the 7110, this is the visual separation portion, from the 7110, the paragraph that covers that. I see nothing that precludes using visual separation when the airport is reporting IFR conditions. So basically what that means is IFR conditions, the simplest of terms, is they're in the clouds, they can't see each other, and we can't see them. That's the basis of it. I can get more in the minutia of it, but it's really not necessary. So if we cannot see the airplanes, and they break out below the clouds, we see both of them, and we're rolling a departure and one goes around and they go back into the clouds, we can't see them. So there's no way to apply visual separation. Yeah, we can see them until they go around and back into the clouds. It's an unsafe situation that nobody wants to be put in. And this is another red flag. This was an absolutely ridiculous statement that you would want to keep so much pressure on the airport that the margin for error was reduced horribly and impacted safety. And then as we scroll down, he goes on to state, he's not the expert, please point me in the right direction. We tried, he just ignored us. He would kick us out of his office. Now, this question here, he said, apparently came from a supervisor. If we were IFR and working a north or south flow, if we saw both aircraft on final or to the parallels, and we're sure we could see them all the way to landing, would we break them out if we were going to lose radar separation? Number one, that is a brutal sentence. Number two, it doesn't make any sense. Is he talking about north or south flow, parallel runways? So if he did, why would they mention parallel again? This makes no sense. If they're parallel and we have go-arounds and they're all going in the same direction, it's a lot different than when they're going to converge if there's a go-around. And on top of that, I cannot believe that any supervisor in the tower would ask that question. Number one, they were much more literate than that and would put it in much, much better terms. But on top of that, I can never see a supervisor asking that question. And then his response, I don't see this as much different except for also having to decide if we can provide, I'm assuming visual here, during the initial phases of a missed approach until some form of radar separation is applied, divergence, vertical, lateral. Okay, well, sure. But if we can't see them, we're not going to have visual up to the point where we have some other form of separation. It doesn't make any sense. If having to decide, and you're going to see where this morphs into scenarios where the supervisors were being put in really poor positions, and in turn, the controllers, the pilots, and the flying public. And you'll see how much of this type of ignorance bleeds on as this unfolds throughout the rest of this construction season. And then this is where it begins. Bottom line is your comfort factor. Use your best judgment. That's not how we run air traffic. It's not a comfort factor. It's not use your best judgment. It's apply the rules and apply them correctly. They're there for a reason, for the safe operation and movement of air traffic. It's that simple. So all the stuff that we just discussed up here is ridiculous, because this is what he thinks his comfort level might be, or what his best judgment is. How about just follow the rules the way they're written? They're there for a reason, and that's the way we're taught. And wait till you see how this statement here continues to move forward this buffoonery. And then he makes this blanket statement, by the same token, pick your players. You need to have trust and confidence in the person's abilities until they say, hey, this isn't right, shut up, do it anyway, something goes wrong, we're going to suspend you. So let's move on to the next one. One of the first entities that I talked to about the scenario that was going on was the NTSB. And the chair at the time for them was Robert Sumwalt. So I went into his office. I requested a letter, and he accepted for me to come in. And I don't know what unfolded by the time I got the acceptance letter and went to his office and the time I arrived. But we weren't in there more than 2 minutes. We were asked to leave almost immediately. I told him I have these recordings that show what I'm talking about. He wanted nothing to do with it and asked me to leave, and I did. It was very demeaning, very humiliating, but I I left without showing him anything because he didn't want to see anything, and I just moved forward. So as things unfolded, I went to the Office of Special Counsel to file a complaint for the safety of the flying public, gross mismanagement, abuse of authority, and that was moving forward as well. Well, as people were coming in and out of the facility before the DOT OIG came into the building to do the investigation for the Office of Special Counsel, AOV was in, which was Aviation Oversight from the FAA to see what was going on. ATO Safety came into the building to see what was going on. And unfortunately, those last two entities, I was not allowed in the pre-brief or the out-brief before the facility was looked at. I was literally almost physically touched not to go into those meetings. I was not welcome in either of them. When I asked other people around the agency within our union, that was highly, highly suspect that they would do that because it's almost always allowed. But I was not allowed to go in. So I was not sure what was being exchanged or what was being said. So I wrote a letter to Congress, and one of the gentlemen that stepped up was Senator Levin. Now, this first document we're looking at here is from the response. I wrote a letter. Senator Levin went to the FAA and said, what's going on? And Mr. Barry Cooper, who was the gentleman that signed this, said, I went in there and complained about everything I explained to everybody up to this point. I went in there and talked about this. And he said, it should be noted also that we have had personnel from the Office of Aviation Oversight visit the facility and observe a particular operation. AOV did not find this operation to be unsafe. Then he goes on to say the airlines are also in support of this operation as it provides another alternative which enhances safety and capacity. So here I go again talking about the influence and the type of communication that the airlines have with the FAA. To me, it's at an unacceptable level, and it started back here. Right now, this particular statement right here was absolutely false. They say, at a minimum, disingenuous is what the DOT OIG found out about the facility, which we're going to cover those documents. This was not even close to being accurate. At the time, I did not know that because I didn't have the documents. Well, long story short, the second part of this is when they came in and actually did all this and they investigated, they found, that it was absolutely unsafe. And they had to retract what he initially put out. I'll come back to this document again, but they were actually in the building and said, nope, you are not compliant. Now, for some reason, and which I'll show this later as well, FAA management thinks if you're told that you're not compliant with something, to them that doesn't mean you're unsafe, which makes no sense given that the book that they keep referencing is How We Safely Move Aircraft. I just don't understand this. They say not consistently compliant. Either you're not compliant or you are compliant. That's what the rules are for. You can't just be consistently compliant when you want to be, and you'll see why they wanted to use that word consistently. So they had to retract their statement. They did it 8 months later. They should have done it immediately, but they didn't. But we're going to get into that. So these are two things that initially I started moving forward with. The NTSB, which didn't work out so well. I went to Levin's office, which worked out well, and the Office of Special Counsel, which worked out as well because they overturned everything that they were doing and made the rule much more safer. But the odd thing is this is the only time they use the word enhances safety. Only time they use safety. They're continually be talking about capacity of the airport, the efficiency of the airport. We're not going to be able to get as many airplanes in and out. Not minding that they're breaking the rules and putting the flying public in harm's way. But let's move on to the next set of documents. Now, the next two documents we're going to look at are from the Aviation Safety Oversight that Mr. Cooper was talking about. Come in and said, they didn't say it was unsafe, this actually enhances safety. So I'm just going to briefly bounce through these documents showing exactly what they found as we move forward with this. October 1st, this was written, as a result of this audit, a specific safety compliance issue was identified. Number one, they found it on August 14th. Those non-compliance issues were briefed to the facility after they were done. They knew about it. They come down here and specifically talk about what I've been discussing. The go-arounds, rejected landings, however you want to say it. That's what the issue was, and that's what they identified. And they noted that in the report. And the report was given to ATO Safety. So that's the first document that proves what they wrote to Senate 11 is incorrect. Then this looks like about 8 months later or so, they talk about the audit again. They talk about the non-compliance issue again. They issued a letter of investigation on the safety compliance issue. Then they go on down here to talk about how they suspended the dependent, independent, back and forth on that this notice was used to do so. And this will come up again, notice 7110.151. They ceased the operation, and all these documents were put in order to make sure we were doing everything correctly. Missed approach requirements. AOV was again informed that all personnel at DTW were briefed. Well, as we move on down here, that's not exactly what happened. They showed up again. The audit team found no objective evidence that DTW personnel received training on the changes to the procedure of the Southwest Flow Configuration. So the dependent, independent stuff that they were talking about and the missed approach and all that, they didn't brief everybody. So again, they're being misleading, lying, not doing their job, so they could keep the capacity, then efficiency, then safety, so they could keep the pressure on the airport. And then they come over here and they state that the audit team found evidence that the operation was still being conducted, even before the personnel were appropriately trained. And the manager, Mr. Figliolo, which we'll talk about him in more depth here shortly, permitted the frontline managers to resume the operation when necessity warranted. Of course, necessity warranted. Capacity, then efficiency, then safety. The audit team, they obtained that memorandum showing as such. And then they continue on with revealed inconsistency in the proper application of that rule. So they weren't even close to being accurate when they talked to Senator Levin's office. And look what everything that they did. And this is going to come out in the IG investigation as well. So let's move on to the next one. So we're going to introduce somebody else into the fray here. Her name is Nancy Court. She was the boss of the three main managers in the building. Joseph Figliolo, who was the air traffic manager, his second in command, Marshal Bulliard, and the tower operations officer, again, Mr. Kevin Gramis. She sat above them in the central service area. So this is a hotline call in reference to how screwed up these operations were being conducted. We weren't getting straight answers. It was just being horribly handled. It was horribly handled with Senator Levin's office, with the AOV and ATOS investigations and what they found. So this particular controller here, the one I have redacted, was one of the controllers helping me and correct this problem. There was a solid 2 or 3 that were right behind me and numerous other people that were behind me. I was just a mouthpiece for this. So he departed an aircraft off runway 2 on right, and there was an aircraft landing runway 27 left, and the requirements that they put forth, now they're saying paragraph 3-10-4A1, which was never used before, was always 3-9-8. So they're throwing that against the wall. They stated that this particular controller had operational errors prior, so since he had this operational error, they decertified him. Okay, attack the controller again. Then she states, once this error occurred, the operation was stopped. It was not because of that error. And I'm going to show a document that shows exactly that. That operation was stopped because of the non-compliance again that was found out at the facility with briefings, the whole 9 yards. Guidance has been provided to the facility in notice 7110.151. She put too many ones in there. Well, remember the previous document? Oh, it wasn't. It was never briefed. Matter of fact, they never even enacted that particular notice. The facility will not utilize that operation until a waiver can be properly processed. Never happened. The FAA totally discontinued the dependent and independent operation of converging runway operations at Detroit, and they changed their entire rules within the 7110, which I'll touch on later. This is another hotline call with Miss Court, and again, it involves a supervisor. Long story short, weather impacted the airport, de-icing was going on, they were landing runway 27 left and arriving 22 right, departing 22 left, or 21 right, which is that southwest flow, and all this stuff was being circulated during this particular issue. Since they decided to suspend that operation because of what was going on, the supervisor in the tower decided to do it anyway. So she says here that even though he was briefed he shouldn't be doing that, the judgment call was made allowing a few departures off runway 21 right. The alternative would have been to turn them around, re-enter de-icing, taxi them to a different runway, stop the arrivals from the TRACON. Either of these operations would have caused considerable delay to the customer. Okay, well there you go. Let's make it unsafe just so the customer doesn't get impacted until something goes wrong. And then they blame the controller, like the document I just talked about. They decertified him. Oh, the supervisor can make the good judgment call. But if something would have gone wrong, they would have went after the controller again. Guarantee it. They already decertified him. Why wouldn't they take it further? The FLM's concern was providing the best possible service to the user. There you go. Capacity, then efficiency, then safety. It had been suspended. They were told not to use it. And then it goes back. The FLM must still exercise common sense and good judgment when dealing with unusual conditions and situations. Nope, that's not how it works. You apply the rules based on the situation you have, and if it slows traffic down, it is supposed to do that because it's supposed to make it safe. Common sense and good judgment. Oh, it's okay for the soup. The controller does it. They get suspended and they get decertified. Absolute derelict leadership. And then she throws in this little comment down here. No one refused or was ordered to depart aircraft. That specifically references the suspensions from 2003. That's what that says. That controller that got suspended technically didn't really refuse to depart. He was ordered to, but he didn't refuse to depart. They suspended him anyway. So, okay, hey, look, our soup didn't do that. So if somebody did something on their own, that would have been their fault. The soup would have been good because he was exercising common sense and good judgment. But all this surrounds this particular document here, poor winds, poor runway conditions, the de-icing, the whole 9 yards. I understand that's difficult to do, but there are rules that apply to that to make sure it stays safe when things go sideways with wind and weather, except at Detroit. So we're going to move on to the next document, and miscourt will become prevalent in those as well. These next documents are from the DOT IG report and what they found in their investigation. The first set of paragraphs, they substantiated what I was talking about and found that the FAA was non-compliant with a safety regulation, and this allowed a potentially unsafe condition to persist. This paragraph here talks about the manager, Mr. Figliolo, and his second command, Ms. Bolliard, providing wording that was, at a minimum, disingenuous to Senator Levin's office, where they stated here, nobody said it was unsafe. Well, in fact, it was. It was non-compliant with a safety regulation. And then when it was called out to them, they waited 7 months before they even tried to correct it. This part here covers what took place, what these people were held accountable for, their corrective actions for doing what they did. The manager, again, Mr. Figliolo, and the operations manager, Mr. Grammis, for the compliance issue, were counseled. Meanwhile, controllers are being suspended and decertified. And they specifically state right here, these managers misunderstood information verbally briefed to them. I'm not sure how that could possibly happen given the verbiage you're going to see below here from numerous entities. Nonetheless, they waited 7 months to correct it. And then that's what this information right here is from Secretary LaHood, voicing concerns that that type of administrative action was adequate. He even had concerns over that. And then we move on to the report itself. Mr. Gramis knowingly ran the operation in a non-compliant manner. They talk down here again about the, at a minimum, the disingenuous statement they gave to Senator Levin's office, and they talk about the 7-month delay. This is all from the IG, and I'll post all these numbers at the end so you can look them up if you'd like to see the entire document. They were found to be non-compliant on that date, August 7th, 3-9-8. We determined that while the non-compliance occurred from approximately May 2007 to October 2007, Mr. Gramis knowingly allowed the non-compliant operation of the Southwest Flow to occur from August 2007 to October 2007. May of 2007, if you remember, is the email when he was trying to set this up. So he knew what he was doing the entire time. Then it goes on to say he was also non-compliant in failing to instruct the manager and the controllers properly on how to do their job. Several occasions from May of 2007 to January of 2008, controllers with inconsistent instructions and inadequate guidance for properly executing the Southwest Flow. That's what they found he did again. Then they go on to state about Mr. Cooper providing the information that informed Senator Levin that AOV did not find this operation unsafe. Mr. Cooper was given the information by Bolliard and Figliolo. Then they go on to state at a minimum disingenuous again, and they really should have provided the information that was told to them by the AOV in the out briefing. They did not. This particular paragraph goes on about the continued safety compliance issue. So prior audits showed that they identified a safety compliance issue and nothing was done for exactly what we were talking about, the controllers and myself. They were told about that in the verbal briefing. They were told right here, non-compliant. Management was informed when they found out about it, and to include increasing the spacing of arrivals. Can't do that because it's going to impact, again, capacity, then efficiency, then safety. He found that Mr. Gramis, once again, did not provide instructions properly to his managers, supervisors, and the controllers to move the traffic safely. There you go. He failed to provide instructions. And then he makes the statement, Mr. Gramis, to the IG. Mr. Gramis told us it would be inefficient for DTW to increase spacing between aircraft, stating that if DTW increased the gap between the arrivals from 4 to 6 miles to strictly comply with the paragraph, it's not even advantageous for us to run this. There you go, using that word strictly. You're either compliant or you're not compliant with the safety rule. And he admitted right here why all of this took place. Capacity, then efficiency, then safety. He admitted it in his own testimony. Then the issue here continues with the non-compliance again, where the controller that we spoke about earlier had his operational error. And it was observed by ATOS, by ATO Safety. Now, I have to correct something I said earlier. I said that the facility did not suspend the operation. They did. That I was incorrect, because when I went back and reviewed this document, and you can see right here where ATO actually issued that notice of 7110.151. So ATO suspended the operation on October 24th, but the facility did do it prior to that, so I was actually remiss in when I said that. But either way, all this occurred, the operational error is because of how they were briefing people. Then it goes on again to continue to state insufficient written instructions. They weren't verbally telling the controls or their supervisors how to properly do the operation. And then eventually, they did not take adequate corrective measures until January of 2008. This started in May of 2007. It's just unbelievable that they were allowed to conduct themselves this way and then just get counseled. During its follow-up audit, AOV found once again everybody was confused. 4 different sets of instructions on how to conduct the southwest flow by several supervisors. Confusion about how to run the configuration. And then finally, that's when they issued in March of 2008 to cease the operation in its entirety. Then they'll go on to state here that Mr. Gramis knowingly did everything. Absolutely knew what he was doing. Down here, it talks again about poor guidance, insufficient instructions, insufficient briefings, materials to do your job. Again, found to be absolutely remiss in their duties. And then this one here is very, I don't even know what word to use. This is so derelict it is unbelievable. So when Mr. Figliolo was asked about the information that was given to Senator Levin's office, or Mr. Cooper, he stated that, well, Ms. Bolliard gave that information. It was her responsibility for doing that. She comes back and says, I don't recall whether I did that or not. But it may have originated from correspondence she and Mr. Figliolo sent up to Mr. Cooper. Did not recall. So let's go back to 1990 when she was interviewed about an accident at the airport, about what was going on. One instance here, she said she was standing by the coordinator position. And then in the next interview, she said, no, I was sitting at the desk doing paperwork. And then down here, she starts talking about, when I say stop traffic, I mean stop everything. I expect my orders to be followed. But then when she was asked why the local controller, the gentleman clearing aircraft for takeoff, had not complied, she stated that the local controller was the only person who knew where the traffic was and that he was the only one who could make the decision. There you go. They're inept in what they're doing. They're derelict in what they're doing. Can't keep their story straight. And it's his fault for what took place. I can't do my job right. I can't even answer questions right, but it's his fault. I just blew me away when I read that, because then it reminded me of what took place in 1990. And then Mr. Figliolo said that he did not think that what they told the senator's office was misleading. He had not been told it was unsafe. He says, I didn't know anything about that until the audit report was out. That's what he's stating here. On the other hand, the auditor who actually came in, this is an absolute brutal statement towards Mr. Figliolo. The auditor who conducted the August 2007 audit and briefings to the managers, he states that the letter misrepresented AOV's findings. Although he said, I did not say it was unsafe, when he briefed the managers in August 2007, he clearly informed them that he had directly observed instances of noncompliance with FAA 7110 in the paragraph, which governs the safe operation of this type of air traffic configuration, and thus for which noncompliance poses safety implications. How does a manager, how does anybody in air traffic, when you're told you're non-compliant, doesn't equate that to being unsafe? Maybe if they wouldn't put people in positions who's never been air traffic controllers in positions as managers of air traffic control facilities, this wouldn't happen. Ms. Bolliard certainly knows better than this. And Mr. Gramis certainly knows better than this. That is a brutal statement from the AOV auditor. saying, really? That's how you conduct yourselves. That's great. And then it goes on down here to readdress the, at a minimum, disingenuous statement to Senator Levin's office, and they should have corrected it sooner. But this is from the IG. Look at the conduct here. And this conduct only rose to the level of counseling. And you're going to see how this applies to the offset localizer. Mr. Grammis is now the QA and QC manager, either for the central service area or the district, I can't remember which. And Mr. Figliolo is still in the central service area. And you're going to see how you can lie to Congress, you can do everything they did in here, everything that was substantiated, with no ramifications, no punishment, no consequences. And then when younger people start coming up that want to go these positions, saying, I can justify anything I want because nothing is going to happen to me. And again, you'll see how this applies to the offset localizer in my next posting. Let's move on. Now, this document consists of pages from the Office of Special Counsel report. And there were numerous ones. I tried to just condense it down for the sake of brevity. So they hit on everything that the OIG did about the poor guidance, poor briefings, written instruction, compliance, non-compliance, everything that they did. They commented on those things here. Then they, of course, voiced concerns that Mr. Grammis and Mr. Figliolo were only counseled for their participation in the briefings and the documentations put out. And that covers this one here covers the response to Senator Levin's office, and they also voiced concerns about just counseling for those people that did that, along with the supporting documentation from Secretary LaHood. And as we scroll down here, here's how the briefings were conducted, why they were so poorly conducted. So once they started trying to brief, generally when you're briefed as a controller, there's a folder with a cover sheet on it that everyone initials it when they're done, and they put the date that they did it. And there are generally documents inside that the supervisor is reading from, or the person briefing you, that is reading from, to make sure you understand, and copies of it in case you want a handout. ATOS showed me one of those folders with my initials on it with documents in it. And I said, that's not correct. There were no documents in that briefing. As a matter of fact, after I reached out to numerous people at the facility, they had the same response that I did. And you can see here that I think the reason they did that was for this. So ATO Safety reviewed it. They determined that management did not provide controllers with any written guidance during the briefings in question, and OIG did not find any evidence that management attempted to contradict this finding. So not, on top of everything else, they're falsifying documents. As a controller, you're initialing off on something you were told, and then they changed it and put it in there and didn't tell you about it? Absolutely derelict. Then they talk about that notice we were speaking about, and it says here that they did not, the facility did not seek the waiver, and they never used that .151. But yet they were using it to brief controllers. And if you remember, ATOS said that resulted directly in the operational error that took place because of their poor briefings. And they go on to talk about that more below that. So this then covers the Nancy Court part of this, Miss Court's part of it, where she believes the employee's manager re-examined, which is Miss Court, the circumstances surrounding the incident and determined that the original counseling she provided was appropriate and no further disciplinary action is required or necessary. That's just unbelievable, because that started back in, what was that, September or October, and she just kept counseling. Oh, you know what, those briefings are poor, I'm just going to keep counseling. Yet they kept doing things wrong, and she thought that was fine. But you don't follow an order over this procedure, it was found to be unsafe, they suspended you. And if you follow what we tell you to do, we're going to decertify you. And yet they're just counseling these people? Just unprecedented, in my opinion. I'd never seen managers of an air traffic facility ever conduct themselves in this way. I may have had disagreements, but I have never encountered this in my life. This here goes on to talk about the same thing about whether there was information in the guide or not, and which is, it directly can attribute to all the issues we had. Non-compliance issues, why weren't we compliant? Because of the poor guidance, poor this, poor that. And that's what this covered from the Office of Special Counsel summation. So their counseling also included Ms. Bolliard was made manager of another facility. Mr. Gramis was laterally moved back to the radar room. Mr. Figliolo was given a 120-day detail in Washington, allowed to return to the facility as the manager and the hum manager. That is just so derelict. And when the senatorial committee in 2020 was talking about significant lapses in FAA leadership, this isn't significant lapses. These are deliberate, complicit acts by numerous managers. These aren't lapses. So we're going to continue with the next document and start wrapping this up. This document is from the Friday Bulletin at Detroit. And what they do is they put this out at the end of the week talking about other airports, what's going on in the FAA, stuff like that. And this was put out October 31st, 2014, and there's the Friday Bulletin title right there. So in here, there was an award given to a task force that was put together to address converging runway operations. And this reduced the safety risk associated with converging runway operations. They go on to state, operations with non-intersecting runways with intersecting flight paths. Our safety data showed that there was a higher risk when aircraft executed a go-around that conflicted with another aircraft departing from a non-intersecting runway, creating the potential for a collision. So everything we were complaining about from 2003 and forward, we were absolutely correct because they addressed the issue. So that really made us at Detroit feel pretty good that what we did at least had closure to it and corrected a safety issue that was a potential for collision. This included policy changes and new automation tools at 140 airports where this risk was identified. This was one of the most significant reductions in safety risk we have made over the past decade. Wow, that's pretty damn good. But if you remember, I went to see the NTSB in 2007, and they basically kicked me out of their office. It was very humiliating, again, very demeaning. Mr. Sumwalt, I did not understand why he did what he did. But in 2014, he was still the chair and makes this statement. The NTSB also strongly recommended that the FAA address this risk. So I'll just leave this document with that, and I'll move on to the closure. I'll be back in a moment. Now we're going to take a trip down memory lane again back to 2005 when Mr. Figliolo put out this memorandum. And he talks about continued disregard for rules, regulations, established protocols. Conduct of the responsible individuals must be called into question. But if you're a member of management, don't worry about it. You're just going to get counseled. Then he continues, if you're a supervisor and not engaged in correcting these habits, you are negligent in your duties and responsibilities. Unless you're using good judgment or you're using your best judgment and common sense, and there's no delay to the user, and just as long as we're getting the best possible service to the user, well, then that's okay. Remember, capacity, and efficiency, and safety. Then he goes on to talk about the operations manager looking the other way. Well, apparently that's also neglect, but just as long as, well, you know what I'm going to say. Then he closes with, to those of you who continuously take arbitrary shortcuts and use your own methods versus those prescribed in the 7110, the Air Traffic Control Guide. Okay, well, when does that apply to management? When they're instructing controllers to do that, and then suspending them, and then decertifying them. The organization cannot afford to tolerate your behavior. So who sets that standard? Ms. Court? For doing nothing but counseling Ms. Miss Bolliard, Mr. Grammis, Mr. Figliolo, but then attacking the controllers? This should be haunting him, and it probably doesn't. But they knowingly did everything, and it's all been proven. Don't have to beat that dead horse. But this kind of conduct and performance moved on into the offset localizer, where Miss Court was involved in that, and so was Mr. Grammis. So we're going to move on to closure. I'll be back in a moment. Well, there you have it. That's who's running the FAA, those types of individuals. And they just continued with their conduct unchecked. No ramifications. Nothing. They were counseled. And then meanwhile, the agency comes out and says, this was one of the most significant reductions in safety over the past decade. So what does that say about the three managers that were not listening to their superiors? They weren't listening to us as controllers, saying, hey, this is wrong. What you're going to do is we're going to hurt somebody. They didn't care. What does that say about the management in the FAA? Again, these are not significant lapses in FAA leadership. These are deliberate, complicit acts. What else did they say? Given the safety concerns, they are perplexed that they would continue to conduct themselves in this way or continue to run that operation. That was the OIG. What do you say about people that do these things that I've listed? Safety concerns, good judgment, best judgment. Make sure you take care of the user. Capacity, then efficiency, then safety. These are the types of people, I believe they actually think that not getting caught in a lie is the same as telling the truth. I truly believe that about these people. I really do. And two of them are still active within the FAA. And the access that the airlines and the influence that the airlines have with the FAA is to me, is at an unacceptable level. When managers can come out and say, we don't want to impact the user, there's a massive problem. And it continued into the offset localizer with Ms. Court and Mr. Grammis. And the disdain they have for tower controllers, bringing these to light, is unbelievable. They make the environment hostile, retaliation, reprisal, harassment. At the same time the Southwest flow was going on, we were battling the FAA with mold. Here's the disdain that they have for the tower. Controllers have to have medical clearances. If they lose that medical clearance, there's a provision in the contract that says, hey, if you lose your medical, we'll find administrative work for you. Other duties assigned, if there are some. This was the first facility that I ever worked at that they denied controllers other duties as assigned. But here's the catch. When the tower controllers would lose their medical, no duties is assigned. None. Nope, send them home, use your own sick leave. If it was a member of the radar room, they got other duties as assigned. As a matter of fact, they were actually assigned duties that were more in line with the tower than the radar room. Updating charts, manuals, doing briefings for the tower, running classroom for the tower. All tower duties were given to the radar room. And everybody in the tower that lost their medical was sent home to use their own leave. That's the type of individuals that were running this building. We had to file an EEO to get that corrected. And, as a matter of fact, when we were sitting in the room with the EEO mediator, Mr. Figliolo, who was the one that made that decision, wasn't even in the room. He sent his deputy in. You heard what I said. He wasn't in the room. He sent his deputy in. Pretty good guy, by the way, that had to sit there and take that beating and be embarrassed. So the disdain for the tower is unbelievable, and it just keeps bleeding through to this day. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to start moving into the into the offset localizer and start hitting on that with much more detail and documents, names, and people who were involved in that. But at some point, this must end. Take care, and I'll see you in a little bit.